Welcome back, brothers, to Lore Armor. Tonight we're diving into the history behind Leetu, commonly known as L2, a Space Marine prototype that was created before the Great Crusade started. Before I end the video, be sure to like and comment any videos, ideas, and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor. Last but not least, be sure to check out the merch in the description below. I want to thank you guys for the support. I've been killing it like usual. Now, let's get into the video.
Who was Leetu? This quiet name like a scar hidden under armor plates, this designation whispered as LE2 in the tongues of technomancers and gene rights. Why does a single figure, glimpsed only in the closing volumes of the Siege of Terra Saga, matter so much when the tales are already choked with Primarchs, Thunder Warriors, Custodians and Legions without number? The answer is simple and blasphemous. If the Primarchs are the sons of the Emperor, then Leetu is the child that came before them, the first true legionary template, the prototype space marine built from the same impossible blood that birthed demigods. To place him, you have to drag your gaze back from the burning skies of the heresy to a terror that is, if anything, worse. The wars of unity still clawed at the face of old Earth. Dust storms loaded with radash scoured the bones of cities. Warlords with stolen atomics sat on thrones of scrap metal and skulls. Across that world walked the Thunder Warriors, the gene-brutalized forerunners of the Astartes, burning kingdoms down in the name of a golden warlord who called himself nothing and everything, and who would one day be worshipped as the master of mankind. Behind those armies, deeper than any fortress and holier than any shrine, the Emperor's gene labs sweated under the weight of their own secrecy. There had been many attempts to perfect the post-human soldier. Some of them were little more than butchered regiments, pumped full of alchemy, and left to die in heaps when their organs failed. Others were stranger experiments, half remembered in scattered data tombs as the Geno-soldiers and proto-legionaries that never made it out of prototype batches. Between the brute savagery of the Thunder Warriors and the cold precision of the future legions, there was a gap in the Emperor's work, a step that had to exist, even if the official histories never name it. Leetu is that missing step, the proof that there was a moment when the legionaries, Astartes, were not yet mass-produced weapons, but singular artifacts. The records that survive, scraped together from the chronicles of the siege and the later compilations of the Lexicanica, name him simply as a prototype space marine legionary, among the first successful legionary templates. He is not a Thunder Warrior, because those were created with cruder methods and a built-in doom in their tissues. He is not a Custodian, those living symbols of the Emperor's personal will, suited to stand guard at his heel. He is not a Primarch, whose very aura bends fate, and whose flesh is a fusion of human stock and something more. Leetu stands apart from all of these categories, yet he is closest of all to the Space Marines that will one day stride across the stars with chapter markings on their pauldrons. That uniqueness comes from his parentage, a word that should not sit easily in the mouth when speaking of gene-crafted weapons. Yet here, it cannot be avoided. The law is explicit. Leetu was created using the blended gene stock of the Emperor and the Perpetual, called Erda, before those same techniques were pushed to a grander, more terrible scale to birth the Primarchs. In cold genetic truth, he is their child, the eldest sibling that never received a legion, the son for whom no world was set aside. He is the living proof that the Emperor did not simply conjure the Primarchs from his own impossible being. Their mother, if that word has any meaning in an age of lab-grown demigods, was Erda, and Leetu carries her essence as surely as he carries the Emperor's. Erda herself had walked beside the Emperor since the age of the first cities, when he wore other faces and other names and shepherded tribes rather than galaxies. She was a perpetual like him, chained to existence by a curse of endless rebirth. In the Age of Unity, She was not merely a companion, but a weapon of intellect, one of the chief geneticists who shaped his grand design for a new breed of warriors. Where others bled and burned on the battlefields, she bled in the laboratory, crafting the tools that would secure the Imperium before it even had a name. When the Primarch project began, it was her rare gene stock he demanded and took, mixing her essence with his to spawn the 20 scattered sons who would lead the Great Crusade. But that same prescience that made her such a valuable ally also allowed her to see further down the road than the Emperor wanted to look. As the Primarchs gestated, as the Emperor prepared a future in which these godlike generals would drive mankind across the stars in a tide of conquest, Erda looked ahead and saw only ruin. She saw a galaxy welded together, not by enlightenment, but by compliance. Whole cultures ground under the boots of giants, her children turned into tools of a vision they had never been given a chance to reject. The master of mankind saw necessity. Erda saw damnation. Their break was inevitable, so she betrayed him. While the Primarchs were still infants, more concepts than commanders, Erda twisted the fabric of the Immaterium and tore open a vortex in the heart of the Emperor's vaults. Through that wound, the warp reached hungry fingers, and the Primarchs were flung across the galaxy, each to a world that would shape him according to the cruel humor of the gods and the cold logic of fate. The official catechisms still mutter that it was the ruinous powers alone who stole the Primarchs. The truth, dragged into the light by the later chronicles, is that Erda opened the door, even if chaos pushed them through it. She fled the imperial palace afterward, a self-exiled mother haunted by what she had done. It is only after that schism that Leetu steps fully into the narrative. The prototype space marine, born of the same blended gene stock that would shape the Primarchs, does not march at the head of any proto-legion. He does not stand guard over the Emperor's private sanctums in Oromite and Crimson. Instead, he goes with Erda into exile. He is listed in the archives as human and Astartes both, a prototype legionary template formerly affiliated with the Imperium and its legionaries Astartes, yet in truth he serves only one mistress. Where she chooses to hide, he follows. Where she speaks against the Emperor's design, he stands at her shoulder, a blade and a shield both. Somewhere between being grown in the gene vaults and walking out into the ash winds at Erda's side, Leetu makes a choice that most of the Emperor's creations are never allowed to make. He swears an oath, not the abstract oaths of legions to ideals, or of chapters to a distant throne, but a personal vow bound in blood and identity. The later accounts are clear even when they are sparse. From the day Erda fled the palace, Leetu defended her, and he swore explicitly to protect her from the Emperor himself or from any who would seek to harm her. That means he did not see himself as merely guarding a wayward asset of the Imperial project. He stood between his maker and the woman who had helped shape him, ready to raise his weapon against his own creator if the need arose. Time passes. The Great Crusade rises and falls into the heresy. Erda makes a desolate home for herself in the old bones of Terra, in a place of ancient stones and older memories, surrounded by a handful of servants and this single anachronistic legionary who belongs more to the mythic dawn of unity than to the age of legions. When Perpetuals like John Grammaticus come seeking paths into the imperial palace, they find Leetu already in place, the silent blade at Erda's shoulder. When she finally chooses to take a hand in the closing acts of the war, it is Leetu she gives away, sending him out from her shadow to guard others in her stead. That is the first hint of the role he will play as part of the band later called the Argonauts, the handful of mortals and immortals who will walk into the heart of the palace and stand before the Emperor at the moment his godhood hangs in the balance. Seen from the far side of 10,000 years, Leetu becomes a living contradiction that says more about the Imperium than entire libraries of devotional text. He is the Emperor's gene child, shaped from the same impossible inheritance that produced the Primarchs, and yet he turns his back on the golden vision of unity through conquest. He is a prototype space marine legionary whose formal allegiance is to the Imperium and its legions Astartes, yet his true loyalty is bound to a Perpetual who betrayed the Emperor's plans and scattered his sons into the jaws of the warp. He stands first as Erda's private champion, then as a key piece in the last desperate gambits around the siege of Terra, a weapon that refuses to be only a weapon. In him, the fracture at the heart of the Imperium is made flesh. The gulf between what the Emperor claims to want for humanity and what his methods actually create. Leetu exists because of the Emperor's ruthless design, yet his very choices argue against that design. That tension will echo through every step he takes from the Age of Unity to the last days above Terra, and it begins here, in the quiet horror of realizing that the first true space marine did not belong to a legion at all, but to a mother who tried to save her children by tearing the galaxy apart. The first thing that marks Leetu apart from the countless warriors who would one day march beneath the Aquila is the simple, heretical truth that he is not grown from just any gene stock. He is built from the same impossible inheritance that birthed the Primarchs themselves. The Emperor of mankind took his own altered, perfected human essence and fused it with that of the Perpetual called Erda, the woman who would become known as the gene mother of the Primarchs. Before that blended pattern was scaled up to produce the demigods of the Great Crusade, it was tested once upon a single subject. That subject was Leetu. He is explicitly described as one of the first successful legionary templates, created from the combined material of the Emperor and Erda before they used the same techniques to fashion the Primarchs. That origin places him outside every comfortable category the administratum prefers to use. Thunder warriors were brutal, short-lived butcher engines, their organs burning out as surely as their wars burned the petty tyrants of old Earth. Custodians are something else entirely, unique works of the Emperor's own hand, more bodyguard and symbol than rank-and-file legionary. Later, Astartes are mass-produced godlings, following genetic patterns based, however indirectly, upon their Primarchs. Leetu belongs to none of these hosts, and yet stands closest of all to the space marine ideal. The lore is blunt about his nature. He is human and Astartes both, a prototype space marine legionary, and he considers the Emperor and Erda to be his parents, even as he acknowledges that he was grown rather than born. We are never given a neat list of implants for him. No chronicle pauses to recite how many bespoke organs were worked into his flesh, or whether he bears a black carapace in the same way as the later battle brothers of the legions. Canon does not waste ink listing glands and nodules. Instead, his nature is shown by implication, by what he endures and survives. He is heavily wounded in the depths of the Imperial dungeon, and still tears apart frenzied word-bearers to save his mortal charges. He stands in the presence of a nascent god-emperor, swollen with warp power, and does not come apart. He is hurled into the shadowed realm of the four chaos powers, and walks back into reality alive. Those are not the feats of a baseline legionary. They suggest a body and mind made closer to what the Emperor intended the Astartes to be in theory. Resilient beyond measure, terrifyingly strong, and unnaturally stable. His war gear underlines the same point. Leetu is armed, not with a standard pattern bolt pistol from the forges of Mars, but with an ancient sidearm from the dying days of old Earth, an EM-676 Union pattern bolt pistol, a relic that predates the formal accord between Terra and the Mechanicum. The Lexicanum sources are clear on this point. His sidearm is a pre-treaty weapon, forged before Mars was bound into the Imperium's war machine. That alone marks Leetu as an artifact of the Unification Wars rather than the Great Crusade. He is a walking reminder that there was a time when Terran science and industry worked without Martian oversight, when the Emperor hoarded the most dangerous technologies in his own vaults instead of handing them to the Red Priests. Later studio material and commentary sharpened the focus further. When the Warhammer studio revisited the earliest Space Marine miniature, a limited edition model whose weapon had long been forgotten, they tied that image directly to Leetu, in community articles and designer notes. His pistol is described as long-barreled and ribbed, laced with pipes and cables that gleam with a depth of artifice even veteran warriors have rarely seen. It is not simply an old bolt pistol. It is a relic of a darker age, a machine whose internals echo the disintegration weapons of the Dark Age of technology. Disintegrator weaponry, in the wider lore, is some of the most terrifying human technology ever deployed short of Exterminatus itself. These guns do not merely burn or blast. Their actinic beams sever the bonds of matter, unmaking flesh, ceramite, and plasteel at the molecular level. Targets struck by such weapons do not die neatly. They are torn apart in explosive unravelings of armor and tissue, reduced to drifting vapor and dust in a heartbeat. Such devices appeared in the hands of Thunder Warriors, Proto-Legionaries, and even anti-Imperial forces during the Wars of Unity, before they were deliberately phased out in favor of safer and more easily reproduced Martian Volkite designs. The Emperor did not share their secrets with Mars. Instead, he reserved the refined patterns for his custodians as Adrathic weapons, and ensured that the knowledge of their manufacture stayed locked on Terra. When you place that context alongside the description of Leetu's pistol, a picture emerges. Here is a warrior who predates the legions, armed with a weapon that seems to sit within that same family of disintegration technologies. Even if the exact classification is debated, the intent of the writers is obvious. Leetu's gun is not a line weapon. It is a singular killing tool from an age where human science casually tampered with annihilation. A sidearm that can reduce even ceramite-clad Astartes to ruined, smoking shapes. The fact that it is described as a Union model emphasizes that it hails from a time before the Mechanicum's dogma, when Terran engineers still named their weapons like industrial products rather than sacred relics. His armor tells a similar story. Leetu goes to war encased in a beak-helmed suit of power armor, pale silver in hue, bearing only a small stamped mark on its plates, a cluster of letters that can be read as LE2. That stamp is more than a serial number. It is a direct echo of that first Space Marine miniature from the earliest days of the setting, and the studio has leaned into that connection. In universe, it marks him as one of a tiny batch of experimental legionary patterns. Out of universe, it anchors him visually to the origin point of the Space Marine figure. In practical terms, the armor's description suggests an early pattern, something between the heavy, brutal plates of the Thunder Warriors and the cleaner lines of later Legion warplate. The pale silver finish is noteworthy too. There is no Legion heraldry, no company or squad markings, no campaign badges. Leetu is not a son of any known Legion. His shell is the color of unfinished steel, of unclaimed prototype material, as if the artisans who built it never got as far as deciding which colors it should wear. He is a weapon without a banner, a blade still sitting on the forge table, never assigned to a regiment rack. All of that could make Leetu sound like nothing more than a walking museum piece, the embodied nostalgia of a setting looking back at its own earliest models. The texts do not allow that reading. Under the pale silver plates and around the M676's ancient frame, there is a person, and the glimpses we get of his inner life are deliberately dissonant with the brutality of his design. During the long, desperate journey across a dying Terra with John Grammaticus and the other Argonauts, Leetu admits that he once liked to draw. He reveals, almost apologetically, that he still sketches when he can. It is a small detail, but it matters. Most Space Marines we see in the chronicles of the Great Crusade and the heresy are defined by war. Their interior lives are expressed through the lens of battle, doctrine, and legion culture. Leetu is different. He certainly fights, and fights with terrifying efficiency, but his self-description focuses on an act of creation, not destruction. The idea of this heavy, pre-accord warrior quietly sketching in a lull between horrors is jarring and deeply human. It suggests a personality that was not meant to be completely consumed by duty, a mind that retained hobbies and contemplations. In a universe where most Astartes are crafted to be living weapons first and men second, Leetu reads as the inverse. He is a man who happens to be weaponized. That tension is reflected in his loyalties. On paper, his affiliations are what you would expect from an early, successful legionary template. The archivists list him as bound to the Imperium of Man, to the Legiones Astartes, to Erda, and later to the Argonauts. In practice, the hierarchy of those ties is very clear. He considers the Emperor and Erda to be his parents, but his loyalty is directed overwhelmingly toward her. After she breaks with the Emperor over the fate of the Primarchs and flees the palace, Leetu goes with her. He defends her from that day onward and swears a specific oath to protect Erda from the Emperor himself or from any who would seek to harm her. That is a staggering act when you remember what he is. The Emperor built him using his own essence. He is effectively a handcrafted heir, a prototype of a new caste of warriors meant to secure the future. Instead of becoming the first captain of a legion, Leetu chooses to stand between his maker and the woman who sabotaged the Primarch project. When Erda later entrusts him to John Grammaticus to safeguard a desperate mission into the heart of the besieged palace, Leetu does not protest or cling to her side. He transfers that vow outward, becoming the shield of a band of Perpetuals and mortals, whose plan runs directly counter to the Emperor's final bid for godhood. His performance on that path speaks to the depth of his design. He is not just powerful on paper, he proves it in the most hostile environment imaginable. In the shattered halls of the Sanctum Imperialis, he and John drag a broken Olanius person back to his feet and through howling demonic onslaughts. When a knot of fanatic word-bearers corners them, Leetu is the one who almost dies holding the line, buying the time needed for the mission to continue. Later, in the bowels of the palace, he stands in front of the Emperor's Proto-Dark King manifestation, helping Loken and the others argue that accepting warp apotheosis would damn mankind. When the Emperor finally relinquishes that power, Leetu is among those chosen to accompany him to confront Horus upon the flagship. On Lupercal's court, in the final storm, Leetu is smashed aside by the War Master's god-swollen might like the others, yet still manages to cut down the corpse of Sanguinius before demons can despoil it, then helps free the shattered Emperor from the throne of nails and blades where Horus had pinned him. He survives a brush with the raw presence of all four Chaos gods when they recoil from the aftermath of Horus's death. When he returns to the palace alongside Rogel Dawn and Constantine Valdor, he even becomes a minor hinge of fate, producing a tarot card of the throne recovered near the Emperor's ruined body, a sign that helps convince the loyalists to sustain their master upon the golden throne instead of letting him die. For all that, Leetu never receives the trappings that later Astartes would consider their due. No legion is ever assigned to follow his pattern. No chapter bears his sigil. The records list him as a prototype space marine, a servant of Erda, a member of the Argonauts, and nothing more. That absence is telling. The Emperor had in his hands a proof of concept, a handcrafted, stable, immensely capable warrior whose body could endure things that broke even Primarchs, and whose mind retained enough selfhood to make real choices. Instead of replicating that pattern, he chose to mass-produce legions of lesser, more expendable demigods, and to bind those legions to the will of the Primarchs. In that sense, Leetu is the road not taken. He represents a way the Astartes could have been, not millions of near-identical gene soldiers locked into rigid doctrines, but a far smaller cadre of bespoke warriors, each one immensely costly, each one allowed a richer interior life and more nuanced loyalties. It would have been a slower, perhaps more fragile path to galactic domination, and it does not fit with the Emperor's cold utilitarianism. His methods favored scale, redundancy, and the willingness to discard tools once they had served their purpose. The Thunder Warriors were culled when they had outlived their usefulness. The Primarchs were scattered when they threatened to warp his plan. The legions themselves would be broken and reshaped into chapters once they became politically dangerous. Leetu, unique and irreplaceable, does not fit that pattern. All of this, his elite, hybrid gene line, his relic weaponry from the unification era, his prototype armor stamped with a designation instead of heraldry, his quiet habit of sketching in the margins of apocalypse, his chosen loyalty to Erda over the Emperor, and his proven capacity to stand in the heart of the heresy's final storm, comes to a head when Erda sends him away from her side. She gives her first son to the Perpetuals as a bodyguard, knowingly casting him into the maw of the Siege of Terror. The next steps of his story will see this singular artifact of the Age of Unity become a key piece in the last game played over the Emperor's soul. The prototype Space Marine will walk the darkest corridors of the palace and stand beside his maker in the final confrontation with Horus, and every choice he makes there will echo the contradiction baked into his very existence. Erda's exile had become a kind of wound in the fabric of terror. She dwelt far from the palace, in a place of old stones and older memories, surrounded by a handful of servants and one impossible guardian who should never have existed. It is there that John Grammaticus comes to her, a man who has died more times than most civilizations have risen, and there that she tells him a truth which bends the course of the siege. Olanius Person, the ancient wanderer John has sent threading through space and time, will reach Terra late. The timing is wrong. The plan is slipping, so she does something that none of the Emperor's high lords would ever have imagined. She gives away her son. She gives John the prototype Space Marine. She gives him Leetu. She says, in essence, that Olanius will arrive a handful of weeks behind the intended moment, and that John cannot reach him alone. In answer, she places Leetu's gauntleted hand on the Perpetual's shoulder and names him Protector. From that instant, Leetu's oath changes shape. He has sworn to defend Erda from the Emperor or from any who would harm her. Now she extends that oath outward. Leetu is to serve as guardian for John, and by extension, for the thread of fate that will bring Olanius to the heart of the palace. It is a quiet, almost domestic scene amid the apocalypse, a mother sending her impossibly dangerous son out into the last and worst phase of the war, knowing that she may never see him again. To understand why she chooses John and Olanius to carry that burden, you have to understand what Perpetuals are in this age and what these two have already done. John Grammaticus began his existence as a Terran soldier in the Unification Wars, a line officer who caught the Emperor's eye only to die before their promised second meeting. Death did not hold him. Xenos' intercession and the designs of the Cabal remade him as a Perpetual, a man who suffers and returns, who remembers lifetimes and languages with equal clarity. He is a logokine, a psyker whose gift lies in words, able to understand any tongue and weaponize the resonances buried in language itself. For centuries he worked as the Cabal's human agent, walking their long view of history and trying to steer the Great Crusade away from the worst futures he had seen. By the time of the siege, he has broken with them and is acting according to his own judgment, using his endless, bitter experience to try to salvage something from the heresy's ruin. Olanius Person is older still. In the long ages before the Imperium, he was the Emperor's warmaster, the commander of armies in wars so ancient their names are myths. He has worn more lives than most stars have circled their suns. He claims to remember walking with Jason and the Argonauts in the age of ores and bronze, to have fought at Verdun and Austerlitz and in the burning desert battles of the final industrial wars. In the 31st millennium, he is a simple farmer on Calth, an old soldier trying to live out at least one life in peace, until John drags him back into the great game with a vision of a terror burning and a dead angel at the feet of a monstrous war master. The horror of that vision and the moral debt he still carries to the Emperor drives Old to take up an Athame blade and begin the odyssey that will lead to terror. He is a perpetual in the truest, rawest sense, not engineered by aliens, not sculpted by the Emperor, simply cursed to live and to remember. When those lives intersect with Erda in the final days of the siege, she sees in them exactly what she needs. John brings cunning, knowledge of the Cabal's predictions, and a willingness to defy every power in the galaxy in pursuit of what he thinks is necessary. Olanius brings an almost obscene amount of lived history and a bond with the Emperor that goes back to when both of them were merely warlords on a single world. Erda trusts them with Leetu because they are, in their broken way, as close to her own scale as anything she will find walking under the ashen skies of terror. They understand what it means to carry the weight of whole civilizations on their shoulders and to fail and still keep moving. Out of that convergence, a new fellowship is born, one that John will half-jokingly name the Argonauts. Between the ruins of Calth and the killing fields of Terra, the little farmer's band of survivors has swollen and then been whittled down again. By the time they break free of the Emperor's children's obscene paradise in the hives of Hatay and Antakya, the group around Olanius consists of the Perpetual himself, John Grammaticus, Erda's blade Leetu, the witch Actea, and a legionary who names himself Alfarius. There are also mortal hangers-on, scarred by Calth and by the long wanderings through Warp Gate and Iron Ruin. But the core of the Argonauts is that knot of impossibilities. Perpetuals, prototype Astartes, and an Alpha Legion presence whose true allegiance is as tangled as the warp threads that brought him here. Their journey to Terra is less a straight line and more a wound in time. From the moment Olanius first steps through a warp gate with the Athame in his hand, the group is cast adrift in a storm of collapsing futures. They fall out of unreality on worlds haunted by the ghosts of Iron Men uprisings, linger there for years, then tear themselves loose again into some other half-remembered century. They are hunted by word-bearers, by Erebus, by Cabal assassins, who now want John dead for defying their designs. Every step toward terror is paid for with blood and sanity. By the time the Argonauts finally breach the sepulchral skies of the homeworld, the Great Crusade is already in pieces. The traitor legions have smashed their way through the outer defenses, and the siege of Terra has erupted into a planet-wide ordeal. The Argonauts are not returning to an imperium, they are crawling into its funeral pyre. On Terra, their first glimpse of the war's heart is not the splendor of the palace, but a nightmare garden raised by the Emperor's children. The hives around Hatay and Antakya have been turned into a false paradise of twisted growth and stolen dreams, a place where refugees wander in bliss while their bodies are slowly consumed. It is here that Leetu first reveals himself to Olanius and his band, cutting a path through Slaaneshi horrors alongside John to pull them out of the trap. The prototype legionary strides through the nightmare with a terrible efficiency, bolt fire and blade work turning demons and debased Astartes alike into ruin. For the survivors stumbling in his wake, he looks like an avatar of some older, cleaner age of war, an echo of the Thunder Warriors, but refined, colder, less prone to madness. For John and Ol, he is something stranger, a son of the Emperor who chooses to stand between them and death. As the band grows again with the arrival of Actea and the supposed Alfarius, Leetu's role within it settles into a pattern. He does not argue tactics at length. He does not take command in the way a Legion officer might. Most of the time, He is simply there, a pale armored constant at the edge of every argument, watching and waiting for the moment when words fail and force is needed. It is in the quieter stretches, in stolen minutes aboard a stolen lighter, or threaded through the shattered habs of terror, that he lets slip details of himself. He admits, almost shyly for a being forged in the Emperor's engrammatic crucibles, that he once liked to draw, and that he still sketches when the chance presents itself. John and Olanius file that away alongside the way he moves, the calm with which he steps into fire. Here is a weapon with an inner life, a legionary template who laughs softly at a crude joke, who studies faces as if he might try to capture them on parchment later. That is the point at which his oath quietly changes meaning. On the surface, Leetu is still Erda's sword. He was sent to guard John because Erda needed the Perpetual alive, and because she believed that the path John and Olanius walked would intersect with the Emperor at a critical moment. But as they crossed the blasted plains toward the palace, skimming over trench lines and corpse dunes in a guttural Arvus lighter, Leetu's behavior shows that his loyalty is no longer abstract. When their craft is shot down and the group slams into the inner defenses, he is not simply following Erda's directive. He is hauling specific, fragile individuals out of wreckage. He is putting his own body between word-bearer Bolterfire and the Calth refugees. His vow has broadened. The Perpetuals and the mortals they drag with them have become his people, and the plan they represent has become his cause: to stop the master of mankind from turning himself into something even worse than the tyrant he already is. In story terms, the Argonauts are a hinge on which many heresy plotlines swing. Their odyssey connects the Cabal's long shadow manipulations to the siege's immediate horrors. Through John, you taste the Xenos conspiracy that tried to direct the heresy. Through Olanius, you touch pre-imperial history and the buried truth of the Emperor's older wars. Through Actaia, you feel the word-bearer's corruption and the lingering poison of Lorgar's cult. Through the self-claimed Alpharius, you glimpse the Alpha Legion's labyrinthine games and Malcador's desperate attempts to steer them. Through Leetu, you link all of that to the Emperor's secret gene projects, to Erda's betrayal, and to the hidden work in the dungeons beneath the palace. He is the steel pin, driven through a stack of conflicting agendas, the blunt instrument that keeps this impossible fellowship from simply being erased by the first serious opposition they encounter. That opposition is constant and escalating. On their way into the heart of the Sanctum Imperialis, the Argonauts are detained by custodians and by Malcador's chosen, interrogated as potential assassins and heretics. John has to gamble everything on his knowledge of the Emperor's distant past and his ability to slip through wards to prove he is who he claims to be. Even after they are grudgingly allowed deeper into the palace, the very reality around them begins to buckle as the warp presses in. They follow a spool of thread John believes they have already laid down in another pass through the same events, staggering through corridors where time fractures and demons bleed in at the edges. Erebus, the word-bearer's architect of atrocity, finally corners them there, in the failing light of the inner palace. In the struggle that follows, almost everyone dies. Mortal companions are slaughtered. Actaia is buried in rubble. Only John, Ol, and Leetu crawl away from the massacre, the prototype space marine torn and bleeding after hurling himself again and again into the path of word-bearer blades to cover their escape. It is as they limp on from that disaster that the shape of their true destination becomes clear. The Emperor's great hidden labor, the project in the Imperial dungeon that was meant to give humanity a back door into the webway and free it from warp travel, is collapsing. The Golden Throne is failing. Warp madness is surging up through the foundations of the palace. The Argonauts are not simply trying to reach some abstract inner sanctum anymore. They are being drawn inexorably toward the place where the Emperor is about to make his final, most dangerous choice. They will first encounter him not as the distant, aloof warlord of unity, but as the half-formed Dark King, swollen with stolen warp power and on the cusp of accepting true godhood. And when that moment comes, when a band of exhausted, half-dead travelers stumbles into the light of a nascent god and sees the future of mankind boiling in his aura, Leetu will be standing there among them. The prototype Space Marine, the first successful legionary template, the Emperor's own gene child who chose his mother's conscience over his father's design, will look upon what the master of mankind is becoming and help to call him back from the brink. That is the moral pivot toward which this whole chapter leans. The Argonauts are not just messengers trying to reach a throne. They are witnesses and accusers, carrying the consequences of 10 millennia of choices in their scars. The fact that one of them is the Emperor's first true Astartes makes that confrontation even sharper. In the dark ahead, beyond the collapsing corridors and the screaming wards, father and son will meet, and the question of what a Space Marine is for will be asked in a way that can never be unheard. The path to the Golden Throne is not a road. It is a wound that has been driven through the bones of terror, a tunnel chewed by the Emperor's will and the labor of countless dead. The Argonauts stagger along it as though they are walking the inside of a hollowed titan. Walls that were once pristine marble and artisan-wrought adamant have been cracked and crazed by bombardment, scorched by leaked warp fire, and stained by the residue of 1,000 psychic screams. Statues of the Emperor, of Primarchs, of nameless heroes stand broken-necked and limbless in alcoves, their eyes black with soot. The air tastes of dust, old incense, and the faint metallic tang of slowly cooling blood. Olanius Person, who has seen more wars than any man should ever bear, leans on his staff and forces one ruined foot in front of the other. John Grammaticus walks beside him, expression torn between awe and disgust at the scale of it. Leetu is a little ahead, because Leetu is always ahead when there may be killing. His armor is scuffed and bullet-scarred, its pale silver dulled by ash, but nothing about the way he moves suggests weakness. In him, the Emperor's first successful legionary template carries on with the inexorable patience of a glacier. He is wounded, certainly. The long fight up from the outer hives has stripped plates and torn joints, and a word-bearer's chain blade has left a bite through his gorget that still seeps on the inside. It just does not seem to matter. The prototype Space Marine walks as if the damage is merely more weight to carry. They reach the antechambers of the throne and find them full of ghosts. Custodians and silent sisters stand in shattered ranks, their bodies laid where they fell, their golden and black armor turned dull under layers of dust. Servitors hang from frayed cables, still twitching in endless mechanical supplication toward doorways whose wards have burned out. The great gates themselves, once a wonder of machine spirit and artistry, have been blasted inward by forces that leave melted channels in the adamant. Beyond them, the Golden Throne sits like a dead star. It is empty. For all the tales, all the legend of the master of mankind bound to his engine, the first. Sight the Argonauts have of that monstrous device is a bare seat, its psycho-reactive frame crackling with stray lightning and its conduits hissing steam into the void where the Emperor should be. The air around it is still hot with the echo of his presence, a pressure that makes human eyes water and sets Leetu's enhanced organs thrumming in dissonant sympathy, but the monarch himself is gone. Rogel Dawn, the Praetorian Primarch, has already come and gone with him. They are too late. The Emperor has stepped away from his throne and gone to meet Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit. That realization hits like a hammer. The whole agonizing journey, the years-long stumble through shattered times and poisoned worlds, the murders and the sacrifices and the betrayals, all of it was meant to bring Olanius and his companions to this chamber before the Emperor left. They were supposed to warn him, to show him what he would become if he drew too deeply upon the warp to talk him away from the edge of something worse than death. Now the throne stands empty, and the King of Ages has gone to war regardless. If that were the end of it, the Argonauts would have broken there, on the floor of the throne room, and simply let the end fall on them. But the age they live in has no mercy, and the warp does not care for neat closure. The palace is not just stone and steel. It is a node in a web of unreality now, and the Emperor's absence from his engine does not mean his presence has gone from Terra. In the lower darkness of the Imperial dungeon, where the machinery of the Webway project is failing and entire realities are grinding against one another, something else is forming. The traitor hosts outside chant a new title in 1,000 debased tongues, the Dark King. They scrawl it in blood and filth on the walls of the Sanctum Imperialis, carve it into flayed flesh and palace stone alike. The warp, reflecting back all the fear and awe and hate directed at the Emperor, has begun to condense that collective emotion into a single, terrible image, a crowned figure of burning light and void, seated upon a throne of skulls and circuitry, his eyes empty, his mouth a wound. That is what the Dark King is. Not merely Horus made into a god, not simply the Emperor elevated into sainthood, but the possibility of a human god of domination and annihilation, born from every tyrannical act the Emperor has ever committed, and every desperate prayer offered in his name. When the Argonauts go deeper, past the empty throne and along the maintenance arteries that run down into the dungeon, they are walking toward that possibility made flesh. The way grows stranger. Geometry stops behaving. Corridors lengthen and contract. Doors open onto environments that should not exist in the depths of terror. A blood-rain downpour that hangs motionless in the air. A chamber whose ceiling shows a star field that shifts through ages with every heartbeat.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
John tastes words that do not belong in human mouths and realizes he is reading the skin of the immaterium itself seeping through the cracks. Olanius grips his staff so hard his knuckles whiten, muttering names of long-dead comrades under his breath, like a litany against madness. Leetu stalks at their point, weapon raised, every sense straining, his preternatural physiology soaking up the wrongness and turning it into a cold, clear focus on the next step. They find him at the heart of it. He is not on the throne. He is not even seated. He stands in a chamber that does not entirely exist in the material realm, a space that seems at once vast and cramped, its horizons lost in black fog, and its center occupied by a single towering figure. The Emperor is swollen with warp power, his aura a corona of screaming souls and radiant force. His flesh flickers between the familiar golden armor and something else, something crowned in shadow, crowned in thorns of raw energy. His eyes burn like small suns, and the air around him howls, with the voices of those who are worshipping him even now, out in the ruins of the palace, and across 1,000,000 worlds that do not yet know they are praying. He is not yet the Dark King, not fully, but he is close enough that the difference feels academic. The Argonauts hesitate on the threshold. Leetu, John, and Olanius are not alone. Garviel Loken, the broken lunar wolf who has been chasing his father's ghost through the war since Istvan, is there as well, drawn by a thread of duty that has not snapped even after half his legion fell to madness. For a heartbeat, all of them simply look. This is the being that designed them, directly or indirectly. This is the architect of the gene lines that made Leetu and the Primarchs, the one who once trusted Loken to be the conscience of the lunar wolves, the ancient warlord who fought at Olanius's side in ages so old the names have burned away. And he is on the cusp of becoming something that will eclipse even that. It is Leetu who moves. First, he takes a step forward, boots ringing on a floor that is more metaphor than metal. The Emperor's gaze, which had been turned inward, snaps to him. For a moment, the light in those eyes clears. the endless reflections of cult and atrocity and hope drawing back enough to show something like recognition. Leetu, the Emperor says, and his voice is like the sound of a continent cracking. He does not call him by title or rank. He does not address him as soldier, as legionary, as tool. He uses the designation stamped into the pale silver plates, the simple name given to one of the first test pieces of the legionary concept. It is proof, if any were needed, that the master of mankind remembers what he has made, all the way back to that early prototype grown from his own gene stock and Erda's. In that single word, Leetu hears memory of laboratories full of humming tanks, of Erda's cool hands on his brow, of the Emperor's gaze assessing him not as a son, but as a success. To stand before that and argue is an act of madness. To stand before it and prepare to oppose it, if the argument fails, is worse. Yet that is exactly what the Argonauts do. John, whose whole cursed gift is words, finds his tongue and starts to speak, trying to prise the Emperor's attention away from the warp crown pressing down on his brow. Olanius, who has killed and died in every kind of war humanity has waged, lifts his athame and swears that he will not watch his oldest comrade turn into the very kind of god they have both spent lifetimes despising. Loken, still bearing the scars of Istvan on his soul, tells the Emperor that if he becomes this thing, whatever victory he wins over Horus will not matter, because the price will be the same damnation writ larger. Leetu adds his own weight to that frail, defiant chorus. He does not have John's gift for rhetoric or Olanius's long perspective, but what he has is simpler, and in some ways more terrible. He is living proof of what the Emperor can do when he treats human beings as material. He tells his maker, as plainly as a warrior can, that if he chooses to become the Dark King, then he will turn all his works into monuments to his own vanity and cruelty. The legions will be nothing but the first wave of sacrifices. Every child born under the Aquila will be another drop of fuel for his apotheosis. There will be no difference between worship of the Emperor and worship of the ruinous powers, because he will have joined their number. The warp presses in. The Dark King's form swells with every heartbeat. Outside, in the burning palace and across the immaterium, the four great gods of chaos watch with something like hunger. This is their bargain. Power beyond measure in exchange for the last fragments of restraint, the last tatters of human concern. The Emperor, whose whole existence has been spent insisting that he can use the warp without being used by it, stands on the edge of proving himself wrong. The pressure of his potential is enough to crush the breath from mortal lungs. Even Leetu, with his engineered organs and gene-forged mind, feels as if he is drowning in the reflected awe and terror of a species about to give birth to a god. And then slowly, he steps back. Not physically. The Emperor's stance barely shifts. What changes is the direction of the flow. The warp power he has drawn into himself, all that murderous, pleading energy, stops pouring in and begins to pour out. It is like standing near a vent as a storm gale reverses. The crown of burning shadow around his head gutters and shrinks. The voices in his aura fall silent one by one, as if someone were snuffing candles in a cathedral. The raw, clawing sense of imminence fades. The Dark King remains as a legend carved into the fabric of the immaterium, a possibility that can never entirely be erased. But the being in front of them is no longer becoming it. He is once more the Emperor, wounded in ways that have nothing to do with flesh, but still himself. He has chosen not to ascend. He has decided for now that he would rather die as a man than live forever as a monster. 10,000 years of future history pivot on that choice. If he had accepted the warp's bargain, the Imperium would have been born under a god-emperor in truth, not just in cult doctrine. Humanity's fate would have been sealed to a single devouring will. Instead, he lets the power go, and steps back toward mortality. It does not redeem what he has done, but it prevents something even worse. The aftermath is strangely quiet. The chamber feels larger, emptier, as if some vast audience has left, and only the actors remain. The Emperor looks smaller, diminished not in stature but in presence. He regards each of them in turn. John, whose Logokine talents have finally been turned against the man who set them in motion. Olanius, whose atome is lowered but not sheathed. Loken, whose faith in him was shattered and has somehow survived anyway. Leetu, the prototype son, who has dared to tell his maker that there are some victories not worth winning. Then he speaks, not with the world-shaking volume of the Dark King, but with the voice of a commander making hard choices. He tells John and Olanius that they are to stay. Their work here is done. They have brought him to the point where he could see what he was becoming and step away from it. The rest is not for them. He orders them to remain in the palace, to see to the remnants of the Webway project, and to what will come after. There is no appeal in his tone. It is the word of a general who knows he is sending others to a place they cannot follow. To Leetu, he simply nods. To Loken, he offers something that might be called absolution, if a man like him believed in such things. To Kekaltus Dusk, the warrior who will join them later in the assault, he gives a task that is little more than a death sentence dressed up as honor. These three, he says, will go with him. Not a host of custodians, not a phalanx of Primarchs and their guards. Just one prototype space marine whose loyalty lies as much with Erda as with him. One broken lunar wolf who still cannot let go of the hope that his legion might have been better, and one obscure fighter whose greatest contribution will be to buy them a few moments at the end. It is a stark inversion of the way the Emperor once waged war. In the age of unity, he strode at the head of armies of thunder warriors. During the Great Crusade, he was flanked by Primarchs and Custodes, his will hammered across the galaxy by entire star fleets. Now, at the end, he walks into the final confrontation almost alone, with only a handful of flawed, individual companions at his side. It is as if all the grand architecture of his plans has collapsed down to a single narrow bridge, and the only ones who can cross it with him are those who have seen him at his worst and chosen to stand with him anyway. There is no dramatic farewell. The Emperor does not waste time on speeches. He turns toward the place where reality grows thin, where a corridor of burning light has been carved between the palace and the vengeful spirit, and begins to walk. The teleport translation that will carry them is not the neat, surgical displacement of earlier campaigns. It is a forced passage through a storm of screaming warp energies and failing machinery, a last, desperate link thrown across a gulf of unreality. The air fills with the smell of ozone and hot metal. Runes ignite along the walls, some in High Gothic, some in languages that predate Terra's written history. Leetu falls into step on his right, silent and implacable. Loken moves to the left, jaw set, every line of him tense with the knowledge that he is going to face his Primarch, his father in Legion terms, one last time. Dusk follows, weapon ready, eyes narrowed against the glare. Behind them, John and Olanius stand on the threshold, knowing that they have done everything they can, and that it may still not be enough. For a heartbeat, just before the light swallows them, there is a pause. The Emperor looks up, as if he can see through the ceiling of the dungeon and the blasted stone of the palace, out into the void where Horus waits. His expression is unreadable. Then the corridor blossoms around them, a tunnel of white fire and screaming color, and the boarding party steps into the storm. On the far side lies Lupercal's court, Sanguinius nailed up like a warning, Horus swollen with the favor of 4 gods, and the duel that will decide the fate of mankind. But at this moment, frozen in the flare of teleport light, all you can see is the master of mankind, no longer a proto-god, walking into hell with his first true space marine at his side, ready to spend whatever remains of himself rather than see the Dark King rise. Lupercal's court is not a chamber so much as a statement. It is the heart of the War Master's flagship and the place where Horus Lupercal chooses to display his victory over everything the Imperium was meant to be. The walls are a fusion of plated steel and raw warp, surfaces that seem to breathe and flex as if the ship itself has become some titanic predator's ribcage. Vast columns rise into a ceiling lost in shadow, their faces carved with images that shift between imperial triumphs and scenes of debasement under the eye of terror. Every step echoes as if there are other floors below, other versions of this room stacked like coffin layers in unreality. At the far end stands a crude mockery throne of hammered wreckage and nailed-on trophies. Upon it, hauled and pinned like a trophy beast, is the Emperor of Mankind, half broken and bleeding, nailed in place by burning sigils that pierce armor and flesh alike. Before the throne at the center of the hall hangs another horror. Sanguinius, angel of Baal, Primarch of the Blood Angels, is suspended in mid-air like an obscene icon, his wings torn, and his perfect features smashed, held up by invisible hooks of warp force for all to see. The air around his corpse crawls with demon shapes, insubstantial things of horn and fang and hunger, kept at bay only by Horus's will until he chooses to let them feast. Into this scene steps the Emperor, not as the Dark King he nearly became, but as the wounded, finite warlord who has rejected apotheosis. The teleportation assault that brings him and his chosen companions into Lupercal's court is a fracture in reality, a spear of white-hot light that tears a path from the failing palace straight into the corruption of the vengeful spirit. With him come Gaviel Loken, still bearing the weight of Istvan and the Lunar Wolf's fall. Kekaltus Dusk of the Hetairon Guard, armored in burnished Terminator plate, and Leetu, the pale-armored prototype space marine, whose existence predates the legions themselves. The transition is not clean. The warp around Horus is too wild and deep for neat translation. They arrive scattered, battered by the pressure of a god's attention. Horus feels them the instant they appear. The War Master stands at the foot of his makeshift throne, swollen with the favor of all four chaos powers, his form constantly edging towards something larger and more abstract than a man. When the Emperor advances, Horus's first response is not words, but force. A gesture, a flicker of will, and raw warp energy slams into the newcomers. Dusk, Loken, and Leetu are hurled away like toys in a storm, thrown across the vastness of the court and into its breaking architecture. Even Leetu, with his hybrid gene line and the resilience that has carried him through the worst the siege can offer, feels bones buckle and armor crack as he hits. Against the chosen champion of four gods, even the Emperor's first legionary template is a small thing. He does not stay down. Leetu rises from the wreckage like something dredged up from an earlier age of war. His pale silver plates are ripped and scorched, his helm's beak snout caved in on one side, but his mind is as clear as it has ever been. His first thought is not of Horus or even of the Emperor. It is of the angel. Through the distortions of the court, he can see Sanguinius still hanging in the air, the warp light flickering around him like carrion birds. Demon shapes are inching closer, drawn by the magnitude of the Primarch's death and the sheer potency of his flesh. The Emperor's attention is fixed on Horus. No one else is watching the corpse. Leetu pushes through broken stone and twisted metal, shouldering aside objects that were never meant to exist in a ship's heart. Pieces of cities and landscapes dragged in from terror by the warp's whim. He reaches Sanguinius, just as one of the demons reaches out a claw to test the Primarch's flesh. A single flare of bolt fire turns the thing into sprayed motes of greasy smoke. Others recoil from him, hissing, half-formed faces folding. into themselves. Leetu raises his M676 Union model pistol again and again, each shot a killing word from a dead era, cutting burning swathes in the creatures that creep too near. It is not enough to keep them away forever, and he knows it. The Emperor sees him then, sees Sanguinius, and gives an order that could break a heart made of stone. Take him down. Leetu obeys. He steps in close to the suspended body, ignoring the way his own augmented instincts recoil from the wrongness in the air. With one hand he holsters his pistol, with the other he draws steel. The angel's blood, thick and dark now, drips steadily from torn wings and shattered ribs. Leetu cuts through invisible bonds that resist like hardened glass, each stroke of his blade accompanied by a shriek from the warp as the hooks lose their purchase. Inch by inch, the corpse sags until finally gravity has its claim again and the Primarch falls into Leetu's arms. He staggers under the weight of a dead demigod and lowers Sanguinius as gently as the battlefield permits, arranging wings and limbs so that the face of the angel is not visible to the grasping creatures that circle beyond. He plants his boots and stands over the body, warding demons off, not with holy icons or prayers, but with the sheer fact of his will and his weapon. While Leetu holds that vigil, the duel between father and son ignites in earnest. Horus and the Emperor clash at the center of the court, and the reality of the hall bends under the strain. To Leetu's eyes, the fight is a physical storm, thunderous impacts that make the deck buckle, Worldbreaker, the Warmaster's great mace, smashing into auramite and flesh, lightning arcs of psychic force, tearing gouges through pillars and turning demons to mist when they stray too close. To Loken, glimpsing the same duel through a different layer of perception, it is something stranger and more fractured. Where the lunar wolf sees coils of symbol and memory, Leetu sees what he was made to see, a battle of warriors, fought with fists and blades and blasts of visible power. The duel goes badly. For all the Emperor's might, Horus has the advantage. The gods buoy him up, knitting his wounds and feeding him strength, drawn from the ruin of terror and the howls of the damned. Blow by blow, he batters his father down, until the King of Ages is little more than a wrecked shape dragged back to the crude throne that serves as the center point of this corrupted reality. Horus nails him there with burning sigils torn from earlier exchanges, star-shaped brands that pin the Emperor through throat and limbs, fastening him to the iron and bone like a sacrificial offering. Dusk makes his stand then, the last custodian still capable of moving, hurling himself between Horus and his mutilated master. He defies the Warmaster in the Emperor's name, his voice ringing out across the court like a bell struck in a charnel house. Horus answers with hate made into light. Warp. Fire erupts from the eye of Horus' sigil set in his breastplate, a beam that should erase anything it touches. It does not erase dusk, not at first. Malcador's earlier sign upon the custodian's armor flares, turning an erasure into a charring, allowing him a few more heartbeats of defiance. Those heartbeats are all Leetu needs. While Horus's attention is fixed on the insolent custodian, Leetu moves. He leaves Sanguinius's body only because he knows that if the Emperor dies nailed to that throne, there will be no one left to hold back the demons for long. He advances through a hail of splintering debris, through heat that blurs even his enhanced visions, and reaches the grotesque seat. Horus has fixed the Emperor in place with a pattern of sigil stars hammered into armor and flesh, each one an anchor to some metaphysical geometry only a Primarch tuned to the warp can truly comprehend. Leetu does not need to understand the pattern to break it. He simply grabs the burning stars and pulls. They sear his gauntlets, sending pain roaring up his arms, but he does not let go. One by one he tears them free, ripping anchoring points out of the throne and out of the Emperor's body. For a few precious moments, the balance shifts. With dusk distracting Horus and Leetu undoing the bindings, the Emperor slumps forward, no longer fully nailed in place. The possibility of escape flickers like a candle under a storm wind, and then Horus notices. He kills dusk completely this time, speaking all the layered names the custodian has borne and using them as a chain to yank survival out of his grasp. What remains of Cakaltus falls in blackened ruin, and Horus turns on Leetu. There is something like curiosity in his gaze for an instant. He sees the pale armor, the stamp of Le2, the way this single space marine moves, and he understands what he is looking at. Erda's space marine, he says, almost amused. Then he tells Leetu that Erebus has already killed her. Bozos, Gene Mother of the Primarchs, the Perpetual who opened the warp and scattered the Emperor's sons, has died fighting 4 demon champions, only to be stabbed from behind by the word-bearer's Athame when she refused to bow. It is a cruelty tailored like a blade. Leetu's whole existence since the Primarchs were scattered has been anchored on Erda. He chose her over the Emperor, swore to defend her even against his own maker. Now, in a single sentence, Horus takes that loyalty and smashes it. There is no time to grieve. Before Leetu can even frame a reply, the War Master gathers the shadows that coil at the edges of Lupercal's court and hurls the prototype Space Marine into them. The shadows are not absence of light. They are presence of other things. Leetu falls through a gulf that is as much concept as space, tumbling out of the court's ruined geometry and into a place where form only occasionally remembers to exist. There, waiting like carrion kings at the edge of all. Possible outcomes are the 4 who have been behind this war since its first whispered moments: Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh. Not as neat, contained avatars, not as the relatively comprehensible demon princes his kind have fought before, but as vast, incomprehensible presences, each perspective like a universe of hate and appetite. Leetu is the Emperor's first true space marine, a handcrafted weapon built from the combined gene stock of a perpetual mother and a psychic king. He has fought word-bearers in the palace corridors, stood in the presence of the Proto-Dark King, watched the Emperor shrug off immortality. Before the ruinous powers themselves, he is an insect. One of them looks at him, a gaze that is not limited to eyes or anything so small. For a heartbeat, Leetu knows, with a depth that no mortal mind is meant to hold, just how little he matters. There is no deal on offer, no temptation whispered in his ear. He is beneath their notice. He survives not because of anything he does, not because of some secret blessing or inner well of power, but because something larger ends. As the Emperor, freed in part by Leetu's efforts, turns Horus's own stolen might back upon him and kills his son at last, the warp storm that sustains the court shudders. The gods recoil in fury and shock at the loss of their champion. Reality folds. Their attention tears away from the prototype legionary, like a storm changing direction, and in the confusion, in the collapse of that particular hall of mirrors, Leetu falls out of their presence and back into the material. When the surviving loyalists are snatched back from the vengeful spirit by emergency translation, Leetu is among them. Rogel Dawn, his armor cracked and his composure hanging by threads. Constantine Valdor, last of the great companions still standing. A scattering of other warriors dragged from the edges of the catastrophe. And this pale armored anachronism from the Age of Unity, all arrive together in the ruined palace. For a brief, strange span of time, Leetu is in the innermost circle of imperial power, one of the handful of beings who stand in the same room as the Emperor as his body dies. The golden throne looms nearby, still empty of its intended occupant, still linked to the failing webway machinery in the dungeon. The Emperor lies broken on the floor, his throat and limbs torn, his flesh charred and shredded by warp power and the gross attentions of his favored son. Around him stand Dawn, Valdor, and Psykers and Tech Adepts who are already arguing over whether anything can be done. It is Leetu, moving with the deliberate care of someone doing anything rather than think about his own survival, who notices the cards scattered across the blood-slick deck. The duel on Lupercal's court was not just a clash of fists and psychic force, it echoed through symbol as well, shattering the Emperor's tarot in a spray of archetypes. Among the fallen cards, Leetu's hand finds one, marked by an image of a corpse enthroned, locked into a device of gold and brass and steel, screaming in silence before a kneeling host of angels. The throne. Leetu does not pretend to be an expert in divination, but he understands messages. He brings the card to Dawn and says simply that if the Emperor wanted to tell them what to do now, this is how he would do it. It is not proof in any mechanical sense. It is a nudge, a symbol, one more piece of guidance from a man who has often spoken in riddles and omens. Combined with the psychic murmur still echoing through the palace that the Emperor must live, it is enough. The decision that will define the next 10,000 years of imperial history tilts. Dawn and the others choose to bind the Emperor to the Golden Throne rather than let him die. Leetu, Erda's space marine, the prototype legionary, has just helped condemn his maker to an unending, half-living torment for the sake of humanity's continued survival. When the immediate chaos settles, Leetu is not granted a glorious command or a place among the legends of the New Age. He is found later sitting alone in a chamber, sorting through a deck of tarot cards built from his original set, and those he has gathered aboard the vengeful spirit, waiting to be interrogated. He has lost Erda to Erebus's treachery. He has watched the Emperor crucified and shattered, then bound to a throne that will hold him in an eternity of duty. He has stood before the four great gods and learned how small even a mythic warrior is beside them, yet he lives. Survival, in this context, is not a victory, it is a burden. Leetu carries it in silence, the Emperor's first space marine, and perhaps his most damning legacy, knowing that in the final reckoning, he helped close the trap that turned a flawed, terrifying human ruler into the screaming god corpse at the heart of the Imperium. After the storm breaks, after the vengeful spirit flees and the traitor armadas begin to withdraw, the palace is not a victory monument. It is a mausoleum waiting to be catalogued. Whole wings of the Sanctum Imperialis are nothing but tumbled stone and fused bone. The great halls that once shook to the march of the legions are filled instead with the low murmur of medici orderlies and the scratch of scribes trying to turn apocalypse into ledgers. In some of those rooms, Primarchs argue over what to do with the galaxy their father has left them. In others, astropaths scream quietly as they try to re-establish even the most tenuous of links with a star field still choked by the dying echoes of the warp storm. In one small chamber, far from those centers of power, a single warrior sits at a plain table and sorts cards. Leetu has taken off his helm. The pale silver of his armor is dulled by ash, the edges of every plate scraped and cracked, but the man inside it moves with slow, precise care. Before him lies a deck of Emperor's Tarot that is not one deck, but many. His own cards, weathered by earlier readings and the smoke of journeying, are interleaved with others scavenged from the shattered set that epitomize the duel on Lupercal's court. He turns them one by one, not in a formal spread this time, but simply to see what comes up next. The throne appears more often than it should. So do death and ruin and the nameless trump that resembles a crowned figure made of absence. He has fought his way through warp plague and demon storms to reach the heart of terror. He has walked into the presence of the Dark King that might have been and helped talk the Emperor back from that edge. He has stood in Lupercal's court, cut down an angel from hooks of unreality, and dragged a god-broken warlord off a throne of nails. He has been hurled into the gaze of the four great horrors that swim at the bottom of the immaterium and come back intact. Now he waits, listening to the distant, constant rumble of repair work and arguments, while some functionary decides when it will be convenient to interrogate him. A warrior built for motion has been forced into stillness. The image is not accidental. It says everything about the place Leetu occupies in the new order that is congealing out of the siege's ashes. He is a prototype Astartes, a legionary template grown from the Emperor's own gene stock, and Erda's, an artifact of the Age of Unity that somehow survived into this even darker age. At every point in the war, he has been used as a weapon, an escort, a guardian. Yet here, when the Imperium is reforming itself with frantic speed, when fresh hierarchies are growing like cancers in the halls of power, he is put in a room and told, in so many words, to wait. He obeys because he has always obeyed. Obedience is written into his design as thoroughly as bone density and organ redundancy. But he does not sit idle. He cuts and shuffles realities instead, letting the cards fall where they will. Perhaps he is trying to read what little future remains for him. Perhaps after seeing so much of the warp from its teeth side, he is simply testing whether the Emperor's tarot has any truth left in it at all. Either way, the sight of him there, the Emperor's first successful space marine, gauntleted fingers moving with care over cardboard rectangles, is a perfect emblem of the age that is dawning. The greatest warriors of mankind have become pieces in someone else's game, and even they do not yet know the rules. That is where the canon leaves him. For all that the Heresy series and its coda dig deeper into the myths of the 31st millennium than any body of work has done before, there are edges at which the authors simply stop. Leetu's final confirmed appearance is here, seated, sorting a deck built from his own cards and those he gathered aboard the Vengeful Spirit, awaiting questions from the new masters of terror. There is no record of his death, no mention of him in the foundation of any chapter, no later cameo in the background of some crusade pict, no fragmentary aside in a codex that quietly reveals he died on a forgotten front. The records go silent. Whether he was executed, retired into some shadow function, or simply lived on and on, folded into the endless war as just another nameless veteran, is not said. The designers have left that space deliberately open. That open ending fits the wider tone of the Imperium's so-called victory. The time immediately after the siege is sometimes called the Scouring in formal histories, when the loyalist legions drove the traitors back into the eye of terror. On the ground, for the survivors on Terra, it feels more like an era of ruin. They sift through rubble, not just of walls, but of ideals. They count their dead and discover that whole bloodlines, whole cultures have been erased. They look up at the golden throne and see not a monarch, but a sentence. The Emperor locked into a machine, screaming silently through the warp, so that humanity can keep limping forward under the gaze of his cult. The question that hangs in the air, unvoiced but omnipresent, is simple. Was any of this worth it? Leetu is made to embody that uncertainty. He is living proof that the Emperor could do better than he did. Here is a son stitched together from the best of two perpetual gene lines, a warrior who retained enough of a human heart to choose loyalty to Erda's conscience over blind obedience, who then still walked at his maker's side into the last battle because the alternative was worse. He is arguably closer to being the Emperor's true son than any of the Primarchs. They were spread across the stars, shaped by alien worlds and chance. He remained in the shadow of the palace, seeing the throne not through the haze of myth, but with clear eyes. When it came to a choice between helping the Emperor become a god or helping to chain him to an unending duty in order to save everyone else, he chose the chain. That is not the decision of a tool. It is the decision of a son who has accepted how monstrous his father is and still cannot quite bring himself to let him go. Later experiments throw that uniqueness into sharper relief. In the wake of the heresy, and much later in the dark heart of the 41st millennium, the Imperium turns back to the question of the Space Marine and asks again whether it can do better. Alpha Primus, a covert trial in which Guilliman and Belisarius Cull test a refined warrior pattern, stands as an attempt to build something beyond the existing Astartes. The Primaris Space Marines are rolled out as the final answer, taller, tougher, armed and armored with patterns of technology that had been hoarded since the Age of Unity. In their own ways, both projects echo Leetu, a desire to create a more stable, more capable, less flawed warrior to serve the same old cause. The difference is that Primaris are made in their tens of thousands, designed from the start to be a mass-produced upgrade. Leetu was never reproduced. He remains a singular piece, a prototype that proved something was possible, and was then set aside in favor of methods that better suited the Emperor's scale and ruthlessness. Outside the fiction, his legacy takes on another shape. When Games Workshop decided to give a name and a story to one of the oldest Space Marine sculpts in its archive, the limited edition model from the mid-1980s commonly referred to as LE02, they did not simply file it away as a curiosity. They tied it directly to Leetu. The beak-helmed, naked-shinned miniature, with its long-barreled, ribbed bolt weapon and archaic armor lines, became retroactively the physical embodiment of this prototype legionary. When that design was revisited in the second decade of the new millennium as another limited model, the connection was made explicit. In lore terms, that means Leetu is anchored visually to some of the earliest imagery ever produced for the Astartes concept. In meta terms, it means that the first Space Marine ever sold has been woven back into the setting as the first successful Space Marine ever made. Between those two axes, the strictly in-universe story and the out-of-universe decisions of designers and writers, there is, of course, a fertile field for speculation. Fans have suggested that Leetu might have been the template for the Grey Knights, those secretive demon hunters forged out of the last survivors of the heresy. Others have theorized that he is some kind of bridge between the Primarch project and the mysterious two lost legions, or that he survived into the Scouring as a hidden advisor, quietly ensuring that certain decisions were taken. All of those ideas have flavor. None of them are confirmed. As of the latest published material up to the end of the siege cycle, nothing in the text says that Leetu's gene pattern was used for the Grey Knights. Nothing links him explicitly to missing legions. Nothing shows him standing behind the curtain in later eras. Those are stories people tell in the gaps, and they should be recognized as such. Interesting, but not canon. What is canon can be summarized, stark and simple. Leetu is a prototype Space Marine legionary, grown from the combined gene stock of the Emperor and Erda, before that same blend is used to create the Primarchs. He serves as Erda's sworn bodyguard after she scatters the Primarchs across the stars, choosing loyalty to her over service to the Imperium. When Erda sends him to protect John Grammaticus and the band that will become the Argonauts, he becomes their shield and sword as they cross a galaxy and collapse to reach Terra. He enters the Imperial dungeon with them, stands before the Proto-Dark King, and hears the Emperor speak his name, and helps apply the pressure that convinces his maker to renounce immediate godhood. Chosen as one of the tiny boarding party, he teleports with the Emperor into Lupercal's court, cuts down the hanging body of Sanguinius, and tears free the sigil nails that pin the Emperor to a grotesque throne. He is thrown into the presence of the four Chaos Gods and survives, not through his own strength, but by being too small to matter in the moment of Horus's death. Returned to the palace with Rogel Dawn and Constantine Valdor, he finds and presents the throne card, nudging the loyalists toward binding the Emperor to the Golden Throne instead of letting him die. After that, he sits in a room with a deck of tarot, waiting. Beyond that room, the Imperium moves on. Legions are broken into chapters. The Inquisition is born. The The codification of the Codex Astartes rewrites what it means to be a space marine. New enemies rise, old wars never end. In the 41st millennium, when men and women on 1,000,000 worlds shout their faith at the stars, the name Leetu does not feature in the litanies. Most chapter serfs, most librarians, even most inquisitors have never heard it. At best, a few archivists, in the depths of the administratum, may stumble across a line in a forbidden chronicle and wonder who this pale armored legionary was, this LE2 who appears in a single strange dossier and then vanishes. The Imperium fights its endless wars with bodies and doctrines that all descend, however distantly, from a prototype that was once grown under Terra's broken skies. Every gene-forged warrior who marches beneath a chapter banner, every Primarchs who slams home a magazine and charges into the teeth of some new abomination, is an echo of that first handcrafted sun. A warrior who chose his own loyalties, stood against his father and his father's enemies both, and then was swallowed by the machinery of the age he helped shape. He does not get statues. He does not get songs. He gets a small room, a deck of cards, and the knowledge that he helped lock the emperor he loved and doubted into a throne that will never let him die. In the darkness of the far future, where even victory feels like a form of damnation that is as close to a happy ending as anyone gets.